Okay, so today we're gonna dive into something that I think is really interesting.
Okay.
And, we've all been there.
Yep.
You walk into a coffee shop and you want to order a coffee and maybe you're not quite sure how to do it or, you're just trying to be polite and efficient about it.
Right.
So we found this really interesting excerpt from a podcast
Right.
called English in Real Life.
Okay.
And this is from episode 1, and it's all about ordering coffee at a cafe.
I love it.
And what I really liked about this is that it's not just
Uh,
a lesson for people who are learning English.
yeah.
It's really a great example of how to be an effective communicator
Right.
in any situation.
Absolutely.
So let's dive into this a little bit.
Okay.
So the podcast starts off by setting the scene. You're walking into a coffee shop.
Right.
You want to order a coffee. And what's great about that is that it's
Yeah.
immediately relatable.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
it's practical, right? I
Mhm.
mean, instead of getting into some grammatical, rule or something like that,
Yeah.
it just drops you right into a scenario that everyone has been in before.
Exactly.
So you immediately kind of have that context to work with.
Yeah, and it gets rid of all the abstract stuff.
Right.
And it just puts you right there in the moment.
Yeah, it grounds you.
Yeah. And so the barista says, hello, welcome to Coffee House. What can I get for you today?
Such a standard line, but think about it.
Yeah.
You're welcomed, you're greeted
Yeah.
politely, and then there's no, what are you up to today?
Yeah.
Kind of meandering
Right.
small talk.
Yeah.
It's like right to the point.
Exactly.
What can I get for you today?
Yeah, very efficient. And
Yeah.
then the customer responds and says, hi, I'd like a cappuccino, please.
And that I'd like is great.
I love that.
So polite.
It is. It's not just give me a cappuccino.
I want a cappuccino.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right. It's I'd like a cappuccino, please. Like there's something
Yeah.
so much nicer about that.
It softens it, right?
It does. Yeah,
No,
absolutely.
it's not a demand. It's
Yeah.
a request.
It's almost like it's giving the barista the option
Yeah.
to say no,
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And then
I'm sorry.
barista follows up and says, what size would you like? Small, medium, or large?
Again, super efficient, right?
Yeah.
Here are your choices.
They're so clear.
Pick one.
Yeah. And then the
Segue.
customer keeps it simple and says, medium, please.
Yeah.
Right to the point.
Direct and clear.
Yeah, no messing around.
Yeah.
And then the barista says, would you like sugar or any extra flavors?
Right. Which is pretty standard.
Yeah. I mean, you go
Yeah.
to any coffee shop, they're going to ask you that.
Yeah.
And the customer says, no, thanks. Just a cappuccino.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
polite and clear.
Yeah. Just gets the point across.
Yeah. And then the barista moves on to the money part and says, $3.50.
Yeah.
How would you like to pay?
Right. Got to get that transaction done.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the customer says, I'll pay by card. It's, again, simple and
Yeah.
to the point.
Yeah.
No ambiguity there.
No. And I think
Yeah.
that's so key in any kind of communication is just being clear about what you want.
Yeah.
And then the barista says, all right, here's your receipt. Your cappuccino will be ready in a moment. Just setting those expectations.
I love that part.
Yeah.
Because it just tells the customer what's going to happen next.
That absolutely.
They don't have to stand there and wonder like, okay, is my drink ready? What's going on?
Exactly. And I think, in any kind of customer service setting, that's so important.
Yeah.
Right? That just a little bit of like,
Yeah.
here's what you can expect.
Totally.
Like it just builds a little bit of trust, I think, too.
Yeah, for sure. And then they wrap it up with the barista says thank you.
Yeah.
And the customer says, you're welcome. Enjoy your drink.
Basic politeness goes a long way. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I love how this podcast
Yeah.
then breaks down some of these key phrases.
Right. Like, what can I get for you today? And how would you like to pay?
Right. Because those are kind of the workhorse phrases you need,
Yeah.
in this situation.
Yeah.
If you're going into a coffee shop,
Like exactly.
and you can learn these phrases and immediately be functional.
Yeah. And it even has a
Yeah.
section called practice time where it encourages listeners to repeat phrases like, I'd like a cappuccino, please, and medium, please.
Yeah. And I think, for people who are learning English as a second language,
Yeah.
repetition is so powerful,
Yeah.
right? It helps you memorize those phrases and just be able to say them without thinking.
Totally. And even for native English speakers,
Yeah.
sometimes we get into these habits of
Right.
not speaking clearly or not being polite.
Right.
So even just practicing those phrases, I think, can be really helpful.
It reminds you to slow down,
Yeah.
to be deliberate about what you're saying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So even though this podcast is about learning English, What I really love about it is that it highlights these universal communication principles,
Yeah.
like being clear, being polite, being direct.
Right. And I think sometimes we think that being direct is rude,
Yes.
but it doesn't have to be.
It doesn't at all.
Right. If you're direct and polite,
Yeah,
it's just efficient,
exactly.
you know?
Yeah.
And you get what you want and the other person knows what you want, so
Yeah.
there's no confusion.
Yeah, it just makes everything so much smoother.
Yeah.
So I think, even if you're not learning English,
Yeah.
this little excerpt can really teach us a lot about
Totally.
how to be effective communicators
Absolutely.
in any situation.
Yeah.
So I guess that leaves us with just one final thought.
Okay.
How often do we go through our days
Right.
just assuming that people understand what we want or what we need?
Yeah.
What if we took a step back and really tried to approach all of our interactions with that same level of clarity, politeness, and directness that we saw
Yeah.
in this coffee shop example?
Yeah. I think the world would be
I think so too.
a much nicer place
Yeah, absolutely.
if we just all slowed down a little bit
Yeah.
and were really clear about what we wanted.
Yeah.
I think that would solve